Yat she Donavan she baa'aoogeed na she ikut asan shle. Hello, I'm Donavan, and I grew up in White Cone, Arizona, and I'm Diné, or Navajo, so I just wanted to introduce myself really briefly there. The reason why I am doing a podcast is because I wanted to be able to share a voice that not everyone gets to hear. I carry a lot of different identities, and I have like 30 years worth of life experience to talk about. And along the way, there's a lot of different life lessons that I learned, and a lot of different stories that I have when it comes to family, when it comes to culture, and then also my journey toward womanhood. I also have a lot of stories on, my younger years when I was, my first few memories when around 3 or 4, all the way through high school. And so that's the reason why I'll be talking through the podcast a little bit more about these topics in my life. Some of my earliest memories that I have are of myself and my grandmother, my great grandmother. Her name is Thelma Yellowhair, and my mother, Ernestine Begay. These women in my life were sort of the reason why I was able to pick up a lot of the cues and the personality that I have today. They're very strong individuals. They're very independent. They're bold women in my life, and so those are some of my earliest memories. And I just wanted to reflect a little bit about that. So I was born in 1988, and the story behind when I was conceived was a little interesting. So my mother met a man in the Phoenix area. That's where she was living at the time. And, short story, she said it was a one-night stand, and she got pregnant. And that's kind of how I got into her, her life journey. So while my mom was living in Phoenix, she was working in social work for the WIC office, and she was living on her own at the time, and she was pregnant with me. And some of the things that she found out prior to my arrival is that she found out from her, her partner's sister at the time, my father, that that she needed to know something about him, and so she told him the big secret, and she found out that my dad was already married and already had a child somewhere else, and that that person found out about her and being pregnant, and just sort of gave her a warning, like, be careful. This person could come after you. They could, do something to you. So just, keep an eye out. And so my mom kind of understood what she was meaning by that. And her and my father's relationship started to become more rocky now that she found out the truth about who he was and kind of the inception that brought me into the world. So we fast forward a little bit about by the time I'm around almost 2 years old, and my mom was at work one day, and my mom would have me stay with like my aunts. She would have me stay with close friends. And so I was just this little tiny baby. They used to call me Peanut. And they used to sort of just watch me here and there for her. And then one day, my father's wife came to my mom's place of work and basically threatened her, saying like, how dare you, break apart my family? How dare you bring up this child with my husband, and all this other stuff, and made a big scene. And my mom was asked to go ahead and go home for the day because, her boss realized like she needs to figure out what's going to happen next, So I think my mom stayed in Phoenix for a little bit, but she made a decision for me, and that was to move home back to the Navajo Indian reservation in northeastern Arizona, where I'm really from. And so that's kind of where like a lot of my first memories started, was kind of like seeing these two women in my life constantly. Again, my mom and my great grandmother. And what they did was that they always continued to show me love and care and kindness and protection and security. And so those are some of my fondest memories I have of these two women. And so a lot of my early childhood, was learning Navajo. Every day, my great grandmother was speaking to me in Navajo. I remember a time where I was constantly, asking what was what, pointing at things, and she would pronounce stuff for me. I followed her out to do some sheep herding. I followed her to, watch her weave. I followed her to go forage for flowers and different types of wild vegetation. So I grew up in a small home community called White Cone, and in this area, it's just full of different homesteads, and it's a chapter house. And we lived like about maybe 8 miles west off the main highway there. And it was beyond this little kind of butte. They called it Smooth Butte. And you go past that butte, and then you hit sort of like the joint use area or dispute land that we have with the Hopi people. So we live right on that border. And so that was sort of where I grew up, was on that butte area. And just sort of south of us were these flat mountains that we would climb up every day because the sheep would go up there. So a lot of my childhood was spent going after the sheep. And I grew up with a lot of cousins. I have 2 aunts and 6 siblings. Through that, you would call them your cousins, but in my culture, they're all brothers and sisters because we all have the same clan. And then my mom had another child later on, and so that's kind of how the context sort of is created for my life story. And so I spent a lot of time with my great grandmother on the reservation, and I was always by her side. I still get community comments when I do visit home, like, you remember that little kid that was always hanging on to Thelma? That's Donavan, is what they would say. So it's really interesting to kind of hear like what people like saw and observed when I was younger, because those aren't part of my memory. So I really appreciate when I hear stuff like that too. I would say one of my earliest, fondest memories I have was, going to the sheep corral with my grandmother. And she was preparing for shearing season in the summer. And we had this ram, and he was a mean bully, I will say that. And I remember she warned me saying, please don't, bother that ram. It'll come after you if you do. And so I didn't heed her warning, and I like went close to the ram, and then I like stuck out my tongue and kind of blew at it, and it just like backed up, and it looked like it was ready to charge. And this ram like slammed me into the fence. And my grandma had to come and get me out of the fence because it was all entangled into it. And that's kind of one of my like really fondest memories I have of being out sheep herding with her. My other ones I have too is like, we would go out and follow the sheep to the windmill, and we would sit on this sort of like high point, and she would lay out her rug, and we had these little like knapsacks where we had food and little snacks in it. But with her, she would always like carry some commodity cheese and some tortillas and or fry bread and Spam. And we would just snack on that. And I would play with my toys in the dirt nearby, and she would be sitting there carding the wool and like picking stuff out of the wool so that way she gets it prepared for washing and then eventually dyeing with some natural flowers that are in the area. So those are some of my memories that I have of my grandmother, and some of the things that I got to see and observe her do, what she was doing that was cultural, what she was doing that was sort of traditional for a Navajo woman like herself. So it was always a really good time to be with my grandmother. And then it came the time when I had to enter school, and that's when things started to change a lot for me, because I went from a household where all I was hearing was Navajo, and Navajo was being spoken to me, to an environment where a Navajo was more or less kind of not a priority. And this was like back in 1991, 92 is when I had started preschool. I went to White Cone Preschool, and that's kind of where I started my socialization with other children. And I started to observe boys and girls and start to compare myself with them. And I always remember just sort of like floating around and trying to figure out who I was. And I remember one day, this little boy, he asked me, he's like, "What are you? Are you a boy or a girl?" And I was a little flabbergasted, because like when you're that age and you don't, you're not, I wasn't really like told I was a boy. I wasn't really told like, you're a man, you're gonna be like this type of thing growing up. I never really had that sort of like specific gender socialization. And like I said, I was always around my mom or my grandmother, or around things that I guess you would consider feminine or womanly duties. And so I was just really confused when I got that question. And I remember thinking, why are you asking me if I'm a boy or a girl? Like, I look like you, right? Like, I'm dressed like a boy. I look like a boy, I think, And so I was, 4 years old, thinking like, is there something wrong with me already? And I remember thinking that. And I remember going home, and I remember crying, because all of a sudden I didn't know what was going on. At that time, I didn't know how to like name my emotions. I didn't understand like what confusion was, what being scared was to be different. I just kind of felt like, I thought, I was pretty normal. So, I cried to my grandmother, and I remember her just sort of like patting me and like rubbing me and trying to calm me down. And and I didn't always have access to my mom. My mom was working all the time. Sorry. It's just, these memories are so profound. It's like I'm still there, sometimes. So yeah, my mom wasn't always around because she had to work. She had to work. And that's something I learned right away, is that you have to work and you have to make a living so you can help raise your children, and help make sure like I was fed, and make sure like my grandma had enough money to take care of me, because my grandmother was already like in her 70s, and definitely didn't have like the income to take care of another mouth. She already had a lifetime of raising her own grandchildren and their grandchildren, and of course me, great grandchildren. And so yeah, I didn't have a lot of access to my mother at that time. And I think I felt a little lost at that time, just because like there was just no understanding of what I was going through. And so I had to really like push that back in my head, like, okay, you're a boy, you have to act like a boy, you can't act out any other way. And so that's kind of how like my journey started when it comes to like gender identity and expression, and this fear of being different, and this fear of trying to stay like I'm normal, or normalizing what it means to be myself. And so yeah, preschool was very strange for me, because I think even at that age, I realized how reflective I was at that as that in that age. I was very reflective on my surroundings, who I was around, as far as like learning, very competitive with learning. I did a lot of hands-on stuff, so I would play in the little like dollhouse stuff, and just really like role play or act out, what it means to be a parent, what it means to like just make food, all kinds of awesome stuff. Like when you're a kid and you get to have an environment where you can be expressive and imaginative, I think that's what I did too, and I really focused on that a lot. And that's where I also like to read. I started to pick up more books at that time. So, and I was also in my younger life too, always outside. I never wanted to be indoors. I would stay out from the time the sun came up until the time the sun came down. I did not want to be inside. With my cousins, we had a lot of great stuff to get involved with. Like there's just the wide open doors. You can do anything you want all day. We would build tree houses. We would, go after the sheep if we had to do that. There were just so many things to do. We didn't have video games. We didn't have a lot of stuff, and even a good part of my younger years, we didn't have running water, electricity. You had to chop your own wood and bring it in. So a lot of that was really scarce for us. And, thinking back now, I always think like, how did they do it? Like, how did they get that done for us? There were so many of us growing up there on my grandmother's homestead. So, so that's kind of how like, my younger life was. And so I just wanted to give a little context about, my first few years of my first memories of what it was like to maybe even start questioning gender, start questioning what it means to be Diné or Navajo. Also, kind of kickstarted my journey in education. And also, I think it was also a period in my life where I realized that there's just so much more to look forward to. And so I'm going to go ahead and end my the episode today here, because the next one that I plan to talk about is beyond the preschool years, and my struggle, and what it felt like to experience bullying, harassment, terrorization throughout my first grade experience all the way through high school. A lot of my stories will be about, again, the intersections of what it means to understand your ethnic identity, what it means to learn a little bit more about what it means to be, I guess at the time, a man, and what it meant to embody something that you weren't, 100% feeling like, or that it was you. And so, my first experiences of sexual desires or attraction, stuff like that, I will kind of talk about that, in my next episode. But I just wanted to lay some groundwork, kind of like my first experiences, just to give some context about my journey. Yeah.